I'd like to take this time to officially welcome Don Carney, Restorative Services Director of the Marin Youth Court. We're glad you're here, Don.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Okay, now everybody's gone silent.
Everyone is on mute except for you, and it looks like there's one person still trying to connect their audio.
Okay.
Don, we'd like to give you an opportunity to tell us about the organization, your background, and open this up for whatever period directly you'd like to until you feel like you'd like to open it for questions.
Okay. So I'm going to start by announcing that we are no longer a program of the YMCA. On the 1st of this month, we went independent. We're filing for our own 501c3. Jonathan has been very helpful in that process. His family foundation is playing the role of fiscal sponsor until we get our own 501c3. The new name of the organization, we're still going to be running youth court and all the programs we normally run, but we met with our young people, and I'm very lucky. The silver lining of this chaos that we're in is kids who had been with me through middle school and high school that went off to college are now back and involved. And we've been holding youth court virtually. We started virtually 2 weeks after the shutdown. And we're the only youth court up and running in the state. So I met with these young people and asked them what they thought the new nonprofit name should be. And they came up with something brilliant, as they usually do. It's now called Youth Transforming Justice. And our goal is to end the school to prison pipeline and to redefine policing and incarceration. So a little bit about my background before I get into the programs. I started my career in Marin County in 1975, running group homes and educational services for young people who are wards of the court. Did that for 10 years. Then I went off and I did 10 years of diversity training under a framework of an exhibit called No More Scapegoats. That's when Pete Wilson was flirting with anti-immigration long before Donald took up the mantle. In that 10-year time period, we saw over 10,000 young people in that multi-formatted exhibit that was interactional. It was very powerful for young people. Then in 2000, I got a job with the YMCA. I was working for, we had a contract with Marin's Community School. Each county has a school run by the County Office of Education for young people who have been expelled or young people who are between placement and probation. And that's the county school. And I did services there for 8 years. And this was in the height of zero tolerance. So we had a young 7th grader who had brought a Swiss Army knife to school at Mill Valley Middle, and he was expelled for that. And he came to county. And within 3 weeks, he learned all about drugs and criminality and was carrying the drugs for the older kids. That's when I challenged my colleagues on the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Commission to find an alternative. And we looked around and we saw youth courts and we thought this would be a good alternative. So when we started the youth courts, I was lucky enough to work with some of the most intelligent, ambitious young people in Marin County who wanted to be attorneys. And we were taught by the DA and the public defender to replicate the adversarial superior court model. And these brilliant young Marin attorneys, wannabe attorneys, were feeling successful by beating up traumatized kids on the stand. And given that my heart was with kids who are marginalized through my group home experience and my own life experience as well, I challenged our young people to come up with a system where there wasn't winners and losers, but come up with a system where everybody was a winner. So we did a deep dive on restorative practices and trauma-informed response. And we quickly changed the format of the youth court. We are the first youth court in the USA that is both restorative and trauma-informed. It is now becoming the trend. So I'm pleased about that. So youth court is based on restorative principles. That means the young person is not punished for their mistake and stigmatized. They are given an opportunity to learn from their mistake. Number one, by owning it, saying, yeah, my bad, I did it. Number two, identifying the harm that was created by their mistake and repairing that harm. And more importantly, repairing any relationships that that harm impacted. And the third leg of that restorative stool is never doing things to a young person, but always doing things with a young person. So there's 2 points in the proceedings where the young person gets to co-create their restorative plan. We don't call it a sentence, we call it a restorative plan. So there's a pretrial restorative hearing with an advocate, and that advocate and the respondent co-create a restorative plan that they put in front of the jury at the court. The jury at the court can go over or above that recommendation, but they have to bring the advocate and respondent back in and renegotiate. This involvement in co-creating their own restorative plan to rectify their own mistake creates what I call authentic accountability rather than begrudging accountability. And it certainly has done that since we've instituted that process. The youth court is also very conscientious about the fact that in Marin County, we have the largest disparity between rich white folks and poor folks of color. And one of the things that we're real aware of, poor folks, white or of color, tend to be in circumstances that generate a lot of adverse childhood experiences, or what's known in my field as toxic trauma. And young people who have toxic trauma have an overdeveloped sense of fight and flight. Their amygdala is actually physically enlarged. Mine is, I know that from my own background, and some hard knocks about overreacting to things when I shouldn't have. So, for a young person who grows up in a challenged community and a challenged household, because that community's challenged, now I'm not saying they all are, but quite a few are, that overdeveloped sense of fight and flight as a very young person is a survival skill. They bring that survival skill to school, they're quickly labeled defiant or non-compliant. And in youth court, restorative plans are built on the young person's strengths, and they address the needs of the entire child, not just the mistake that brought them into the youth court. So our jury's role is not to judge. Their role is to be curious about this individual in front of them, interview them, offer some problem-solving suggestions around the poor choice that got them there, but to move on and get to know who this individual is, what their background is, what their challenges are, and most importantly, what their strengths are. And quite often, a young person who has been traumatized and labeled defiant, non-compliant, and when they come into authority, they're labeled delinquent on top of it. They're not usually real aware of what their strengths are because adults have been telling them what their shortcomings are their whole life. And all traumatized people have strengths. So our jury's role is to interview them, find their strengths, and clearly reflect those strengths back to them as a peer recognized strength. And then their restorative plan is built around those strengths. And the restorative plan has mandatory components and discretionary components. The mandatory components are each respondent has to come back and support others who are in the same situation between 2 and 5 times as a youth court juror. That's one of the most elegant aspects of it. And they also have to get involved in 15 to 40 community engagement opportunities. We shifted long ago from community service, which didn't feel very self-driven coming from a youth court, to community engagement. So an example of that is quite a few of the youth court kids gave testimony to city councils around it being unwise to open a retail cannabis outlet. And they were very persuasive community members on that issue. They talked about how normalization of cannabis derailed them and how difficult it was to get off of cannabis, particularly when the THC count is through the roof these days. So that's an example of some of the community engagement the kids in youth court found to be valuable. And them having an experience of making a presentation in front of a city council and then ultimately hearing that the city council decided against opening a retail cannabis outlet, that gives them a real sense of their own agency. And we're big on helping young people find voice and agency, authentic agency. So the kids in youth court about every 6 months review the procedures in youth court and suggest changes. And we talk about those changes a lot. And after we've talked about it a lot, if we still think it's worth implementing, we pilot it. And sometimes it crashes and burns and we dump it. And sometimes it flies high and mighty and we keep it. And our youth court procedure is an iterative procedure that we've engaged in collaboratively with the young people who volunteer and the young people who are referred to the youth court by authority figures. Also, another component of the mandatory aspect is attending our alcohol and drug safety skills training. And that's a harm reduction approach. I'm a big believer in harm reduction. I've been to over 30 memorials in 15 years for young people in Marin County who passed away due to drugs or alcohol. So it's a very serious epidemic in Marin. So the way we do the training is 6 hours of it is with a young person and at least one parent. Both parents are welcome in a group setting. So we have anywhere between 5 to 8 families on a Saturday. And it's a no shame, no blame framework. In the Saturday session, we go over the ingrained biology of risk-taking of a teenager. So the adults understand this is a biologically driven behavior between the ages of 12 and 25. It's not driven because their kid doesn't have impulse control. Now, they do have a challenge with impulse control until their frontal lobes are hooked up. Then we talk about the environment that these young people are navigating, and quite frankly, the environment that the adults are navigating that is awash with drugs and alcohol and marin. So we try and give it an environmental framing rather than an individual moral framing. And then we ask the adults if they're willing to share what they experienced in their risk-taking years. That's roughly 12 to 25. 12 is the age of differentiation from the family system, where a young person stops wanting to please their parents and starts wanting to please their peers. 25, when the frontal lobes hook up. Those are what I call the risk-taking years. So I asked the parents to reflect on the environment that they grew up in during the period of time. What did they experience around them as far as drugs and alcohol? And were there any casualties? And I suggest that the parents do not tell old war stories. This has proven to create a very fertile ground for the young people to share the environment that they're experiencing today on their campuses, what substances are available, what substances are popular, and who they're worried about. So that's sort of the family session. And we ended it, when we're in live time, we had a great ending where we went through role plays about how to save your friend's life when they've done too much of something. An example of that is a person drinks too much alcohol, they pass out. If they drink way too much alcohol, they have what's called alcohol poisoning. What that is the message from your back stem and your brain stops sending the message to your lungs to work. When I'm dealing with the kids, I frame it, you can drink so much you forget to breathe. So if their friend's down and out, we train them to do what an EMT does in the field. You give them a sternum grind with your fist and knuckles. And if you get a wiggle, it's just going to be a hangover. If you get a flat response, that person's on their way to an alcohol OD. And then I encourage them to call 911, and I inform them that there's amnesty for calling 911 on an OD. They will not be sanctioned, arrested if they do that. So that's important. Most young people don't know they have amnesty for calling on an OD. And we go how not to be sexually assaulted, how not to be a sexual assaulter. So how to disarm a drunk from their car keys. One of the things I highly suggest is not only having a designated driver in your peer group when you go out to party, but have a designated thinker as well. Quite often, designated drivers consume marijuana and they feel they're in alignment with their duty being the designated driver. The designated thinker is there to remind them that marijuana slows down your reflex skills a little differently than alcohol, but does slow them down. So that's an example of that. Then I do 3 additional 2-hour sessions just with the young people. The first session is I make them ambassadors of restorative justice. And by doing that, I ask them, who was impacted by your poor choice? How were they impacted? How have you or how will you repair that harm? So we go through their poor choice half a dozen times in the training, and this is a reflective process for them. The next day, we do two things: myths that kill. When teens are educating each other on substance use, a lot of it is mythology, and that mythology can be fatal. And then we talk about how to handle yourself with the police on a search. Young people have civil rights. They should know they have civil rights, and they should know how to deploy them, particularly on a police search, in a way that's respectful to the police officer and won't dig the hole deeper for the young person. So we have them say the exact words on a search that the officers learn in the academy to set a boundary. No, officer, I do not consent to a search. Things like that. On the third day, we take their drug and alcohol inventory, and we get their parents' permission to do this. So, and we get their permission to do it. And the way that works is, what was the first drug you experimented with? How old were you? What were the circumstances? Who were you with? How did it work? Have you been using it since? How much? Has it changed? Is it still working? And we go through all the drugs. And phenomenally, in Marin County, we might go through 20 drugs with one kid, because this kid has access to all kinds of exotic drugs. Then we discuss, what are you curious about that you might take? And through these conversations, I lay out what these drugs do to the brain and body. And then we go through a group process where they make their own determination about what drugs they are going to keep in their life and what drugs they are going to exit from their life. And I ask them where they're going to be in 10 years and ask them if they think their plan will allow them to get to where they want to be in 10 years. This is a respectful way of having a young person, number one, reflect on the substances they're doing and make a grown-up decisions about what substances they're going to do, so they're not so spontaneous. I'm trying to cut the spontaneity of the reflexive drug use. So that's the other mandatory part of the restorative plan. Other aspects of the restorative plan can be, if a young person asserts that they want to do better in school, we'll set up tutoring. If they assert they don't have an adult in their life they can trust, we'll set up a mentorship. If they say they're depressed, we'll get them some therapy. If they say their parents are physically abusing them and they would like something to be done about it, we'll call the authorities. So those are the discretionary aspects of the restorative plan. We also moved upstream several years ago to divert suspensions in school. A kid being suspended in school, sent home, 90% of the time is unsupervised, and it puts them on probation's radar pretty quickly. So I've been working for the past 10 years with school districts throughout Marin, trying to convince them to come up with alternatives to suspension that is peer-driven on the school campus. It looks a whole lot like youth court, only the result is a diversion of suspension. If the kid has done something really egregious at school, then they refer them to the youth court. So we're diverting kids from probation, we're diverting kids from suspension, and we started a new program last year for newcomers. These are young men who have come across the border unaccompanied. Last year, San Rafael had 150 of them, predominantly from Guatemala. And when these kids did something egregious and the school tried to convince them to divert the suspension by going to youth court, they heard the word court and panicked, understandably. So we created an alternative for these young people. We found former newcomers from the same background, the same ethnicity, who has succeeded with school and avoiding criminality, to run a support group and accountability for whatever thing they did at school that they got referred to. And it's done in a group process rather than a court process. So that allows them to embrace it and learn how to navigate both school and the community from people who have learned to do that several years prior to them. Most recently, I've been contracted to help Madrone. Madrone is San Rafael's alternative school, to make that a restorative culture. Madrone, 2 years ago, came up at the bottom of the barrel in test scores and school climate scores. And because they came up at the bottom, the state offered San Rafael an opportunity to apply for a grant to retool Madrone. So we are now working with the students at Madrone as partners in changing the school culture. So that's pretty much roughly what I do. This past couple of weeks, I've been scrambling, putting together a nonprofit with Jonathan's help, and separating from the YMCA. We want to add a new component that the YMCA was not all that comfortable with student activism and policy lobbying. So our students are going to be looking into police department budgets, taking a look at what civilians could be doing a whole lot better and a whole lot more economical than police officers. And they're also going to be looking at the possibility of the closure of juvenile hall and retooling juvenile justice. Now, I want to say the probation department in Marin County, under the leadership of Mike Daly, has been a phenomenal partner in this process. Mike has been supportive from day one, and he continues to be supportive, and he's been retired for 2 days. So I'll keep my trap shut now, and I'll take questions.
Okay, if everyone wants to unmute themselves and just go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll call on. Well, if you're not on screen, just say your name and we'll allow you to ask questions.
Question.
Lori, you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, Don. Thank you for speaking this evening.
Tell me who you are.
I'm the director of the Law Library.
Okay.
The Marin County Law Library.
Got it.
And so I work with Denise. The program, the First Citizens program, was Denise's brainchild. And I've been working with her and Chris to put it on. So, so you said initially that the students that made up the youth court were, if I understood you correctly, were students who were interested in, you know, maybe careers in law.
Correct.
But now it sounds like, the people who make up the youth court are prior offenders who have completed their restorative plan. Is that right?
The majority of the young people who are involved voluntarily are volunteers. About 10% of the kids who come in through the referral door actually stay and get involved.
Okay.
But they're all welcome to participate in anything we're doing. And
how
we
many-
really try and create a community.
How many students do you have on the youth court?
Well, over the 15 years, we turned 16 in April, and we've diverted about 1,300 kids.
Wow.
From juvenile justice. Thousands and thousands of kids we kept from being suspended because we've been involved with all the schools in Marin. And our volunteer base on a Thursday night when we were up at the Superior Court, we get anywhere between 30 and 50 kids showing up to get into 12 seats.
Wow.
And I focus grouped with the kids about why they kept coming. And the comment was, this is the one program in Marin County where my brain is respected. And it's also an opportunity for kids from Ross and Tiburon to rub shoulders with kids from the canal.
It's really sounds like quite a remarkable program. My two kids are grown and they went to the Sandra Bell schools for most of their education. And I've never heard of this. So do you do more outreach in the schools now? I mean, how if a student wasn't part of this, or wasn't part of it in terms of needing to have a restorative plan, or a part of it by having made a mistake, how do they find out about it?
Well, I do annual trainings at the schools where I train staff and students together on how to run a restorative program to divert suspensions. So kids hear about it there.
Okay.
And I've grown pretty lazy because the word of mouth fills us consistently. I must get 3 or 4 referrals a week. And now that we're on the Zoom platform, I have kids watching from LA.
Oh, wow.
So Cindy has a question.
Hi, Dawn. I had 2 questions, and I may have missed this at the beginning.
Please
How
tell me
do-
who you are, Cindy.
I'm sorry, Cindy Swift, Fairfax.
Oh, hello. I'm a
Hi.
Fairfax kid.
I know. How do kids get referred from the local communities? And I'm thinking through the police.
Okay, so
So that's first. And then the other question would be, how does the program address youth that don't fulfill their obligations? How do you kind of move that along? Thanks.
okay, I'll take the latter question first. 95% of the kids referred to the program successfully complete the program. Now, the 5% that don't complete, that's an interesting analysis. About 2.5% of them, their parents pull them out of the program and put them in a very expensive outdoor program in Utah. So if the kids pulled out of my program and sent to a different drug program, then probation drops the case. The other 2.5% are people who can't afford to live in Marin anymore and just move away. So rarely do we get somebody who's still here and we have an ethic we call case managing to success. I want these kids to experience success in this program. We're not here to trip them up and play gotcha. We're here to ensure that they're successful. Our recidivism rate is about 7%. It has been consistently 7% for the entire time. Now, referral sources. We've had police departments refer directly. Some police departments still do that. A lot of police departments refer to probation, and then probation refers to us. That can take anywhere between 4 and 6 months. I'm always encouraging probation departments and schools to refer directly and quickly. The sooner you see a young person around something dumb they've done, the more recollection they have and the more, impact you can have. For instance, last night I had a case and it was 6 months old. And the kid was having a sincerely hard time thinking about all the aspects of what happened because so much time had gone by. We also do take direct referrals from parents as well. I have had parents say, I want my kid to have the youth court experience, and I'd like him to have it without having to be arrested first. And we allow parents to refer themselves and their children to our harm reduction group as well. And one of the things I have in the harm reduction group that I didn't tell you about, we always bring in a speaker who paid the ultimate cost of the epidemic. So I'll have a parent talk about the loss of their child. And then I have the kids promise their parents they won't put their parent in that chair. I use all kind of theatrical tools to try and get their attention and capture their brains.
Thanks.
You're quite welcome, Cindy.
So Don, I have a question. I'm Chris Kirby. I'm on the law library board. I'm also a family law attorney and worked in a nonprofit for 20 years. So my question is, you're starting this new nonprofit. Do you need board members? Where does your funding come from?
We need board members. We need funding. Right now, I have some funding from probation. I have some funding from the Board of Supervisors. I have some funding from San Rafael for their programs, but it's really not enough. Last April, the San Rafael Police Department closed their Youth Service Bureau. It had been running for over 40 years.
Wow.
They diverted young people the same way I do, not the same process. I was not fond of their process, to be honest. They were having Dominican students clock MFT hours and be supervised by an MFT with the police department. And a family would get 2 or 3 sessions and the kid would get 10 to 15 community service hours. And I didn't find it to be highly effective because kids who violated again weren't eligible for their program. So they sent them to probation and I would get them. So we were seeing, prior to inheriting that program, we were seeing about 50, 60 cases a year. They were doing 100 to 150 a year.
Wow.
In 9 months, we grew by 185%.
Wow.
And our demographic shifted dramatically from 70% Caucasian to 70% Latinx. So I had to bust butt, raise some money, and hire a bilingual speaker. Now all of our programs are offered in both English and Spanish.
Great.
I just visited Chief Bishop recently. She's in the unenvious position today to be probably the only police department in the country that took about $200,000 away from youth services and put it back into policing.
Oh.
So I told Diane, I said, listen, we didn't get enough money to be able to cover the caseload. And it sure would be good if you would suggest to the city council that this is a way of redistributing some of the police funds to youth services. So she is pondering that now. And I was pretty generous. I didn't ask for 200. I asked for 50 annually.
That's a good example of police funding.
Oh my. Yes.
Does anyone else have any questions? I have another, but I don't want to take up the, I
If
heard,
I could,
oh, sure, go ahead.
if I could just briefly, I just want to thank Dawn as well. I've heard your name, Dawn, for a long time in our community, but I'd never met you. I'm a teacher currently in the Tam Union High School District, but I'm a Drake grad. My 5 siblings also behind me were Fairfax residents since 1970 when I was 9. So a long time. And then my son was a Drake grad as well. He's 31. But I've worked as a teacher and then school counselor in the district basically since 1991, more recently school counseling. But I work in special ed at Redwood now. And I knew Corey DeMars, and I interned for my counseling psychology with him at San Andreas. So I know we've worked in the past. That was during 2012, 2014. We worked with restorative justice practices. We try to work with them at Redwood as well, but I would love to get you back out there to talk to everybody again.
I would love to get to Redwood.
Yeah. You know what I could see? I'll see whatever is going, when we get back to more normalcy, as it's challenging for everybody, but I would love to put your name back out there.
Yeah.
And they work, we have, you know what? And his name's going to escape me right now. Oh my gosh. He works with the suspensions deals. I know you know him. You have to work with him together. I can't remember his name all of a sudden. Oh, who's one of your guys in the county? He works with Tam District, and he has for a long time when kids get
Keith
suspended.
Jackson.
Yes, thank you. It just went out of my mind. But yeah, so I know him pretty well also. And you guys together could do
Keith
something.
and I actually worked together years ago.
Oh, you did? Okay, cool. Nice. That must be where I heard your name.
Yeah.
And then Mike Daly went to school with my brother. So that's very funny. But I know that he was in charge. And I think you probably knew Matt Odetto.
Yeah.
You know Matt Odetto? Yeah. He was in my class at St. Rita's, and he was a good buddy of mine. So yeah, but thank you so much for doing what you do. I wholeheartedly agree. And I would love to see if maybe I could fit into your program somehow along as a volunteer or whatever at a point.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'd like to offer you, and it's pretty easy now that we're in a Zoom world,
Right.
is you can observe a youth court proceeding some Wednesday.
Great.
So just email me,
Okay.
and I'll put you in the queue.
Okay, that would be great. I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Hi,
Thank you.
Dawn. This is Denise.
Hi, Denise.
Wanted to ask a question. One of the things that I found very intriguing when you talked about your evolution as an independent organization and moving perhaps in directions that the YMCA hadn't particularly thought about at this point for you. You mentioned advocacy. As this evolves, I'd really like to hear you come back. This concept of additional advocacy, let us know what's happening. Let us know the changes that you see in the organization from adding this type of advocacy.
Yeah, I would love to. I saw a lot of young people who testified around the cannabis licensing. Kids who were really struggling with cannabis. And it helped them gain more of a perspective on their own use, particularly once they saw that this was Wall Street, big alcohol, and big tobacco moving in. It sort of cut the romance from, the small farmer up in the Emerald Triangle.
May I tell you right now that we've been fortunate to have a board that's been supportive of the idea of expanding some of our outreach into civic education. And that's why I'd really like to hear from you as time goes on. We would really like to pursue these avenues with students, about learning what their rights are. We previously had the Public Defender's Office come and talk with us. Educating students what their rights are as young people, as they age out of protected groups and into adult groups. These are all things, understanding what their rights are and how to be a citizen. That's why I'd love to hear you come back as there's more involvement in this.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for today.
You're quite welcome. It was an opportunity for me. Anybody else got any more questions?
I have the one question. I heard you speak probably a decade ago, where you talked about how the prevalence of alcohol use among adults in Marin County. And one of the examples you gave was that our Costco sells more alcohol than any other Costco in the country.
Yep.
Still a fact?
Oh, yeah. It's been worse since COVID.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, in fact, some of the displays you see in Safeway, the alcohol displays at the front,
Mhm.
Safeway has a non-pursuit policy. And kids know that. They can pop in there, grab something, and if they get out the door, the employees are not allowed to pursue them. And when I interviewed the manager about that, I said, how do you handle the loss? He said, the alcohol corporations reimburse them for the loss.
Because they want the alcohol up front?
The volume of sales outweighs the loss of shoplifting by placement.
Wow. That's shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me share one other drug trend that's alarming. The advent of the vape. It has made it very easy for young people to experiment first with tobacco. It's not like combustible, you choke and it's miserable and you have to learn how to do it, particularly with the flavors. So I have 7th graders that I see around vaping nicotine. The next year, they're vaping concentrated marijuana without a clue about what it can do. And the concentrated marijuana is addictive. Statute of limitations is up. The stuff I smoked at Woodstock was about 3%. What kids are getting in leaf today in Marin County starts around 20% and goes up to about 45% in leaf. And then in concentrate, it goes all the way up to 99%. And that concentrate also leads to psychotic breaks. I'm tracking 11 young people that I've worked with who have had psychotic breaks. Jonathan, I saw you put something on chat, but I didn't read it.
I gave everybody your email address, the current
Good.
one, and tell them that it's going to be changing soon because you will be moving under Youth Transforming Justice.
Yeah, but I'm still getting Y email, so that's fine to use for now.
Yeah, I'm assuming next week that we should get that changed.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any last questions before we wrap up for the evening?
No, I'm
We'd
glad
like
at
to-
I'm glad at the attendance and hi. I want to say hi, Dennis.
Well, I just
Dennis for
hi.
showing.
I just want to say thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Yes,
There's
thank
nothing
you.
I like more than to talk about my program.
Thanks for your service to our community, and thanks for everyone attending tonight. We hope to see you back next month.